One of the most notable localization differences between Mother 2 and EarthBound is in Magicant, Ness's dream world. While in EarthBound, Ness is rocking his jammies from the beginning of the game, which makes sense given it's a dream world, so it has a lot to do with sleep, and there are many allusions to the beginning of the game, when he is in his pajamas. The original game went in a different direction. While EarthBound alludes to the beginning of the game, Mother 2 alludes to a different beginning. The start of Ness's life. He's naked. A really bold choice for the time, as nudity in gaming was very uncommon, less so for games in Japan, but nonetheless not seen much. Makes sense too, nudity is a very embarrassing topic, sort of the genesis of self-consciousness. Look at the story of Adam and Eve. She gets tricked into eating the fruit that makes her realize she's naked, becomes super self-conscious, then drags Adam down with her. Gets him to eat it, now he's all embarrassed. Later, God's walking in the garden, they say they don't want him to see them because they're naked. He asks who told him that, and what happens next? The world's first self-conscious man immediately blames his girl, then blames God, then finally takes responsibility himself. Real. I bring all this up to make it clear that symbolically, nudity has been an image of vulnerability in storytelling for a really long time. It also branches into many areas of a lifetime, particularly those relating to love and birth, two major thematic motifs of the entire Mother series. With all that explained, we now arrive at the question: why is Ness naked in Magicant? Well, as I said before, nudity is a very vulnerable thing, and though that's acknowledged in countless world cultures, what does it specifically mean in Japanese culture? Despite EarthBound being about American culture, though it's actually more complicated than that, it was conceived and executed by a Japanese man, so that bred cultural experience cannot be ignored, as each of our own individual lives impacts our interpretations and understandings of, well, everything around us. Despite its connotations of sexuality in much of the world, in Japanese culture it conveys a lot of different things that aren't always meant to be erotic. It's much more closely associated with the fragility observed in older Asian and Middle Eastern cultures. With this vulnerability, though, also comes honesty, with nakedness likewise conveying one has nothing to hide, that everything is on the table. So what's all this have to do with Mother 2? Well, everything, really. There's a ton of symbolism strewn about Magicant, and we're not going to get into all of that now. One, because I want to do that as its own video in the future, and two, it's not all relevant to the topic at hand. In relation to the nude being symbolic of vulnerability, it's also closely related to birth, the time in which we all emerged into the world, naked. This one girl in the Japanese version calls Ness a pervert for walking around
all natural.
But it's important to keep in mind this whole sequence is in Ness's head. It is a dream. This is relevant because it conveys a sense of Ness's understanding and awareness of himself. This girl is a figment of his imagination, and her acknowledgement of this demonstrates his self-consciousness. I did a video on this in the past, but to briefly sum things up, throughout the journey in EarthBound up to this point, Ness has had an internal struggle and battle against the evil forces of Gygus in this world, and all that culminates in Magicant. His reluctance and fight with these forces has been building throughout the adventure, and story-wise results in the need for Magicant. Sure, it's literally happening in the game, but it's all a dream. He conquered the 8 sanctuary locations in order to overcome his demons, and then has to literally do so within himself, with the fight against Ness's nightmare, or, as he's known in Mother 2, Ness's demon. The Soundstone disappearing after this is a mere formality to show this character change, and his powers expanding is to demonstrate how overcoming these struggles has made him vastly stronger as a person, which in turn, by the game, is shown through him gaining in terms of ability. With this narrative in mind, we can deduce Ness is naked in Magicant as a symbol for this rebirth he experiences. Hell, he even finishes Magicant in water. A thing about storytelling is when you know what you, the author of it, are trying to say. In this case being one must conquer their own struggles and fears in order to help others do the same, is that controls everything around it, that every other decision should attempt to be conducive to that same idea. It should also connect to the theme. Symbolism is much more powerful than one may think. You see, while explicit events can be engaging when dealing with very clear actions and consequences, symbolism taps into a storytelling that's referred to as implicit. You're smart, you know this. What's going on under the hood, what it all really means. I think it's pretty clear this is what Ness being naked means, but maybe you draw something different. It's all in being able to build up and defend your interpretation. You know that saying, a picture says 1,000 words? Well, that's what symbolism is all about. If they didn't, video games, as well as movies, wouldn't be nearly as developed as they are today. Seriously, this line of thinking has done so much damage to the world it's unreal. Everything you include in a work has meaning, whether you intend it to or not. It's not as black and white as this means this, no matter how clear you may think you're being. This means whatever the person who experienced it takes away from it. If you want that strictness in some element's understanding, then you have to put in the work to make it as clear as you can, and it still won't always land. And that still can be a good, even great thing. These images let you think on what's happening, which is more conducive to deriving a very personal connection to a piece of art, as one can arrive at their own understandings of the elements within it, as they're channeling what's being said through their own experiences, which is what EarthBound itself was all along. A view of American culture through the eyes of a non-American. This is likewise why the world of EarthBound feels so unique. It's how a toy sees the world. Not literally, of course, but in a way that's both true to himself and made to work within the story he was trying to tell. Here's a little test. Throughout this video, I've been using images of flowers. What do you think I've meant by them? They have a specific meaning here to me, but I'm not going to reveal what that is. What I want to know is what you interpret them to mean. I'm sure I'm going to get plenty of different answers to that question, and that makes me happy because it means they're resonating with you in different personal ways. Sometimes being intentionally broad can be a good thing, but not knowing what you're trying to say, being intentionally vague, is different. There's certainly a time and place to be more explicit in terms of what's happening. A story can't work solely on symbolism. The symbolism should be the frosting on the cake, while the cake itself is the plot, what literally happens. And you can throw some allegory or satire on as topping. But giving the right amount of leeway is what will take the story you're telling from good to great. It's about tapping into those guttural, raw, human experiences we all share, and visualizing them in a way that conveys the feeling you're trying to express. Because that's what art is. It's feeling. Just as it's an expression of the one who's creating it, it also becomes part of those who've experienced it. Something they can take away with them forever and ever. Something they can come back to sometime later and still feel the aftershock of how deeply they were affected by that meaning. The meaning you gave it.